got to meet Diablo Cody, the writer, through Jonathan. And she said to me, if you could do anything you wanted, what would you do? And I said, well, I have this script I wrote, and if I could have anything in the world, I'd want to make it. And so she goes, go make it. And I was like, easy for you to say, Oscar-winning screenwriter, right? But she said it to me with such conviction that I was like, all right, you know what? I'll try, or, you know, die trying.
Hey folks, welcome to Dream Path Podcast, where we get inside the heads of talented creatives from all over the world. Today we talk to writer, director, and producer Rebecca Eskreis. Rebecca's directorial debut is What Breaks the Ice, starring Madelyn Cline, Sofia Hublitz, and Lukas Gage. This is a film about two teenage girls who are from different worlds, and they come together during a summer break and form a very strong, fast friendship. And a tragedy happens, and that tragedy tests their friendship in some pretty compelling ways. There's themes of consent and trauma and loyalty throughout this movie. I watched it with my 20-year-old daughter. She enjoyed it, and I enjoyed watching it with her through her lens. So it's really a nice film to see with other people, so that you can talk about, you know, their perspectives on these themes throughout. And Rebecca did a great job. She wrote it herself. She got the funding together. And the story of how this came together is really quite amazing and inspiring. And one of the fun anecdotes that she talks about in this interview is the work that she did as an assistant for Academy Award-winning director Jonathan Demme, who directed Silence of the Lambs and a bunch of other great films. And Rebecca just has a lot to offer in terms of advice for young storytellers and filmmakers, aspiring filmmakers. And she's just an inspiring figure herself, because she's self-made, and she's done all of this herself with no help from, you know, wealthy family members funding her movies. And she's just an amazing artist. So I enjoyed getting to know her, and I hope you do too through this interview. Without further ado, let's jump into my chat with Rebecca Eskreis. Rebecca Eskreis, thank you for being on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here. I love your podcast. I got to catch up on a couple episodes today. So
oh, really? Yeah.
I loved it.
Which ones were you listening to?
I listened to the most recent, the recap, but also the interview you did with oh gosh, I'm blanking on the name of the movie now. Is his name Carson Mell?
Oh, Carson Mell. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Some of our stallions.
Guy.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm really excited to see the film. It sounds really interesting, and he seems like a really interesting person. So,
yeah,
good interview.
It's interesting to talk to people that are so used to being behind the scenes, and as a writer and being in the writer's room, just being sort of isolated from, you know, everything in front of the camera for so long, and then boom, he's not only directing, but he's acting in it, and you know, you can tell that that's not probably his passion to be acting, but he just out of necessity did it to make that movie. But Rebecca, it was a really fun thing to watch this movie with my daughter, who is 20 years old, my youngest daughter, because, you know, my lens of seeing What Breaks the Ice is different than her lens, obviously, and her generational difference in terms of how she sees issues like consent and, you know, the friendship that developed between Emily and Sammy. You know, it was just really fun. It was just my daughter Isabel and I watching this movie, and we were chatting back and forth throughout the whole thing. And we just had different takes on, first of all, whether this was a period piece. I think we were trying to discern that for the first maybe 15 to 20 minutes, and then we sort of concluded that it was, but not explicitly, I should say. But it was a lot of fun to watch this movie, but so much to unpack here. So why don't you start off by telling my listeners and me what you tried to accomplish with this screenplay in terms of themes, and also bringing your own experiences into the film?
Sure. I love hearing that you watched it with your daughter. That's wonderful. So yeah, actually, I think a lot of filmmakers will embarrassingly say, or maybe I shouldn't be embarrassed, that, this film took a while to make. And I initially started the screenplay, believe it or not, in the summer of 2014, and put it away for a while and came back to it when the time was right, about 5 years ago now. But initially, honestly, I started writing it after going to see a screening of Boyhood with Richard Linklater present. And I'm a huge fan of his work, and I was lucky enough to have him be involved in this project, actually, much later on. And but I was blown away by that movie in so many ways. But it really, at the time, it was sort of a crossroads in my career, and I was thinking about how I was going to get my first film made and what I wanted that film to be. And so I actually, I had a couple of ideas I was thinking about writing, and this is not the first feature that I've written, but this is the first one that's produced, obviously. But I was thinking, well, if I were going to write a movie called Girlhood, what would it be about? And what would it be like? And so actually, I had also Andrea Arnold is one of my favorite filmmakers. And I had heard an interview with her where she said, if you don't know where to start with your characters. And so I just began with conversations between these two friends. And, obviously I've never murdered anybody. And if I did, I wouldn't talk about it on this podcast. Right. I spent most of my summers from the age of 9 until I was 14 or 15 in sleepaway camp. And we used to, when you don't have grownups around you, the things that girls will talk about is actually both jarring and sophisticated at the same time, and also completely naive. And I remembered I kept a really detailed journal of all of my summers, and I'm still very close with a lot of the friends I made. And so this movie really began as my memories of summertime with my friends, and the things that we used to talk about, and the things that we were curious about. And that's really where the impetus of the movie began. And then as I started writing it, I started to think about what themes I wanted to explore. And I think that's why the period of the film is really important, which I can get into later. But I really wanted to make a movie where there were no good guys or bad guys. It was kind of just this morally ambiguous place. And I think that that's also being a teenager. You're sort of living in an ambiguous space. You're not a kid and you're not an adult, and you're trying to figure things out. And so I really wanted to approach the three main characters as people who had some good qualities and some bad qualities, and it kind of explored that, but from the lens of a teenager.
Yeah, I read the press kit on this film, and it really got me thinking, because I realized that there was a lot to it. There was, the Monica Lewinsky reference, and, Bill Clinton, and the comment from the mother about, which is funny because it's so spot on for that time, where she said, "It is a woman's job to know better." And you're like, oh man, this just captures an era. And we were all, I grew up in the 80s, and so I'm a little bit ahead of you. But in the 90s, I was still forming as an adult. And that is so true. The way we looked at the Monica Lewinsky scandal, if that's what you want to call it, I thought it was so appropriate to bring that in, to really give a sense of what it would be like if these girls had revealed what truly happened. And I don't want to give anything away, but there was an importance to that scene, the Monica Lewinsky discussion at the dinner table, that was way beyond just showing that this was a period piece and that this took place during a specific time period. I think for me, what it did was inform what these girls could expect if they revealed certain things about their experiences.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And definitely. I love that scene. And I love Kathy in that scene. She's so jarringly out of what feels so out of touch today. And yet at that time was exactly what a mom like that would say. And,
Right.
When I came back to the film, like almost 2.5 years later after I started it, it was in 2016. And I was thinking about, we were all so excited about a woman running for president, and that woman being Hillary Clinton. And it was so very fresh in my mind, just kind of how much had changed and yet had not changed since in those 20 years or so since the movie takes place, right? And so on the one hand, you have this generation of girls who grow up with these very particular values. And then as they grow up, and I would say I'm part of that cohort of women who were like, wait a second, we villainize these two women, right? This wife who didn't leave her husband and this basically kid who was like, fell in love with the most powerful man in the world, right? Or whatever,
Right.
or whatever she was seduced by him, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, we villainize the two of them. And not to say that, anyone was completely innocent or guilty, which I think would sort of fit in with the theme of this film. But it was that, like, it wasn't about him. And he was kind of the one at the middle of this, the president.
Right.
And so I think that there was something about, and that was a big piece of, to your point earlier about why we wanted to keep the period element very subtle, because it was sort of a way to say, well, how far have we come, and how far have we not come in many respects, and I think there were still people who were villainizing Hillary even 20 years later. And here she is, like, running for president. Like, how incredible is that? So without making it too political, that scene we felt was like, what I love about the placement of that scene is up until then, you don't know if it's a period piece or not a period piece. And then
Right.
It's suddenly like, oh, and I'm already in this story and invested in these characters. And so, that was sort of that was a big piece of, like, the structure of the way we ended up finally editing film.
Yeah. And also I think the period is a great way. It's a great device of, like, you in your press kit, I think you talk about being untethered at camp, and how our kids these days and younger generations will never know, literally, they will never know the experience of being untethered and sort of set loose in an environment like that, where there's clashes of classes, but there's sort of a great equalizer that occurs at camp or at a location like that, where everybody goes to the same spot, and nobody's better than anyone else, except for the fact that people know if you're a townie or a local. But they're all together. They're all untethered by technology, by parental supervision. And that device, number one, for me, really is sort of nostalgic. So it was fun to watch, but it also gives you freedom to tell a story that wouldn't really make sense in today's era. So that was pretty cool.
Thanks. Yeah, we really enjoyed it. And a lot of the crew are, people around my age and a lot of women. And we had a great time, like, kind of in a way, like, reliving our adolescence as we were making the film. So and it was fun to sort of also, like, educate the actors about it, because, they're young and, like,
yeah, they don't know,
they don't know, like, these kids don't know what it's like to, like, not have a cell phone, or, like, they're like, did people really talk this way? Or did people really do this or that? And we're like, yeah, like, this is actually based in reality, but yeah, the untethered aspect, I think it's even, it's like, not to get all meta about it, but it's almost like the way we enjoy entertainment has changed so much. Like, people would just go and sit and watch a movie, and they wouldn't be, like, also texting and also watching something else. And, that whole immersive experience in and of itself. But that was also kind of the fun of making the movie, was we didn't have to, it allows you the freedom to just think about people and how they interact with each other, and not have to think about all these other things, like, well, wouldn't someone call this one, or wouldn't they have tracked them there? Or,
Mm-hmm.
like, those things don't matter. It's about the characters in the story.
Exactly. And I think the lake scenes where they're sitting on the docks and they're diving in the water, it's a good example of what is really not happening now with technology. And I'm starting to sound like an old man, like a grandpa, but this is, I think it's true that these younger generations just don't know what that experience is like, and they probably never will unless they go to a sleepaway camp where, for instance, I sent my kids to meditation camp a couple years ago, and they still hate me for it. But they had to literally check their phones in, put it in a basket for a week, and
Yeah.
and experience life without technology for a week. So unless they're forced to do that, they're not going to know what it's like. But it was fun to see that captured on screen. Another thing that I wanted you to comment on was, I didn't pick up on it because I'm not a super geeky film nerd in terms of like really picking up on the nuances of filmmaking. But I read in the press kit that you shot the scenes of the boys with handheld cameras, and there was a purpose for that. Can you tell my listeners why you did that?
Yeah. So that was a very deliberate choice. And the reason we did that is because we felt like that I think handheld camera naturally creates a sense of either anxiety or momentum or disruption in some way. And also a lot of people feel that it almost feels more authentic because none of us live our lives on a tripod. We are our own handheld or steady cam or whatever it is, that's how our eyes perceive the world. So, but I think for us, it really was this feeling of we wanted everything with the girls for the most part to feel, especially their conversations, to feel like they were in their own bubble of a world, at least before the midpoint of the story where this event occurs that I don't want to necessarily give away how it happens. But although, it's pretty early on in the movie, that a crime has been committed, but without going into the specifics. But the point of the handheld camera with the boys was to show that like, this is something that's disrupting their world and is exciting. And it creates like almost this like kinetic energy in their lives because they're excited about it, but it's also disruptive. And as the movie progresses, especially for Sammy's character, you understand why. And so we wanted to create that feeling of unease and uncertainty for all of us, but especially with teenagers who are discovering their sexuality. It's exciting and nerve-wracking and anxiety-inducing and also like thrilling. And I think that was something we really wanted to go for in those scenes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was a great exercise, I think, in capturing the ambiguity that teenagers live in, this world of grays where they're still children, but they're exploring, they're curious, and they're taking risks. And there's just complicated things that are happening. And as a parent, it's horrifying to think that your kids are actually, they're all doing the same stuff. They're all kind of going through the same stages and risk taking, which is necessary. But it really captured that part of teenagehood really, really well in a fun era.
Thank you. Yeah. And one thing that sometimes you don't want to admit as a filmmaker that sometimes people will pick up on things that you subconsciously were doing, but you might not realize you were doing in your storytelling. And one thing, like, my parents actually didn't read the script before we shot the movie. I kept asking them if they wanted to, and they said that they didn't. So, oh well. But my mom watched the movie, and the first thing that she saw like an early cut of it at a like a test screening we did, and she said and of course she's a mother, and she said the first thing that I took away from watching this is no one was paying attention to these kids until it was too late, and I did we did talk about that when we were shooting it. Like, we really wanted this to be like from the perspective of the kids and like not have the parents, like it wasn't a about the parents. It really was about the kids and the world they live in. And that was definitely obviously very intentional. But like, that was the first thing that my mom said when she finished the movie was she reacted so strongly to the two mothers and like the way that like the kind of the final sequence of the film is structured,
Mm-hmm.
how like these moms are just horrified by what they've missed. And that is something that I think it's definitely a theme of the story, but I didn't realize that would be the first thing that a mother might watch the movie. And that's the first thing that she would think, you know?
Right.
So
can you tell us about the logistics of putting together a movie like this? Because you attracted some great talent to the film.
Yeah.
I mean, these are sought after actors and actresses. They've been in a lot of great films and television series. And I know you mentioned Richard Linklater was connected in some way to this project, but how were you able logistically to put this all together, to get the funding and to put this team together and attract all of this talent?
It's definitely moving a mountain. I'm not going to lie. I think every filmmaker comes into the role in different ways. And the path I chose was I worked my way up like as a Hollywood assistant. And like, I really did that whole, like working as an assistant. And then I was a story editor. And I worked at some very big, well-known production companies. And I was really fortunate to like kind of build my reputation in that way, because I think when you're going out and trying to raise money for your first movie, and I'm not someone who's from a family in the industry or independently wealthy or anything like that, I felt like my best pathway was going to be kind of like moonlighting as a writer while I was building my resume as a really like with a really strong background in production and development, and kind of knowing how to navigate the system and understanding how movies get put together. And then I was very fortunate to be Jonathan Demme's assistant for about 2 years on his last two films.
That's amazing.
And I knowingly say that working for him changed my life in so many ways, because first of all, to sit next to a master director like that, I mean, and he was such a kind and generous person with his knowledge and with just his time. And he kind of took me under his wing, and I get a little like choked up about it. I'm so eternally grateful for that experience and to have known him. And I think that was kind of the turning point for me. And not to, be name droppy, but, I got to meet Diablo Cody, the writer, through Jonathan. And I was sort of at this crossroads in 2016 where I had started this particular screenplay. And I had just left my job with Jonathan. He was taking some time off, and I felt like it was time for me to move on. I'd been an assistant for 8 years after also going to graduate school for film at USC. So I was already in my early 30s, and I was like, I really want to get this show on the road, because if I'm going to do it, now's the time. And anyway, I asked her to have coffee with me, and I said, and this makes it sound easier than it was, because making a movie is impossible, but I said to her, I'm really at a crossroads. Like I've been on this path in development, working for other people. I really want to get my first movie made. And she was like, if you could but I was also confused. I was like, should I try to go work in television? I'm sort of lost. And actually she said to me, if you could do anything you wanted, what would you do? And I said, well, I have this script I wrote, and I know it needs another pass at least. But if I could have anything in the world, I'd want to make it. And so she said, okay. So she goes, go make it. And I was like, easy for you to say, Oscar-winning screenwriter, right? But she said it to me with such conviction that I was like, all right, you know what? I'll try, or, die trying, whatever. So, but through the next, over the course of the next 2 years, I was able to reconnect with a friend of mine who actually is my business partner on the film. She's also the production designer. And she and her husband had been experimenting with putting money in films. And they said, we would like to be the first money for you, but we don't want to put our money in unless you can find other investors. Like, this has like, we can be a piece of your financing. We can't finance your movie,
Right.
but we believe in you and we believe in your abilities.
Right.
And so, I think what ended up helping, and they ended up being the first money, but a piece of over nearly 20 pieces of equity, which is how we put the film together. And that's not a secret if you see the credits of the film.
Right.
But what ended up helping me tremendously was I ended up winning a grant through the Austin Film Society. I lived in Austin for 2 years. I moved there to work for one of the founders of the South by Southwest Film Festival. And through winning this grant, I then got invited by Richard Linklater to attend a workshop that he does at his ranch. And it was there where I met, where James Ponsoldt, who's another amazing director, came and worked with me on the script and workshopped some scenes. And that was really instrumental in helping us attract other investors. And then once we had enough money to just say, okay, we have some pieces of money, we very strategically started going out to talent agents and basically saying like, hey, we're trying to get this off the ground. And then from there, we were working with a really wonderful casting director who has great relationships from working on much bigger stuff too. And that's how we kind of came to the rest of our actors, with the exception of Joel Allen, who I had met at that Richard Linklater workshop. And because he had acted in another film that had been at that workshop the year before, a comedy called Never Going Back. And so he'd been invited to do a table read with us. And I thought he did a fantastic job. And I actually just offered him the role if he wanted to do it. And he was like, yes. So that's how it came together. I mean, there's obviously many more pieces to it. We could be here for 5 hours talking about how movies get made, but I would say it was a combination of, I worked my way up to gain the credibility from other people to believe in me that I could execute on a film.
Yeah. What a journey. Wow. And it sounds like just a combination of, knowing what you want to do, but putting in the time and paying your dues. I've looked at your filmography and your IMDb page, and you literally have done pretty much everything that you can do on set, including directing now, feature film. But these connections that you made, did going to Barnard at Columbia or USC, did those experiences create a network for you that facilitated these other connections with like Linklater and Demi, or how did that unfold?
It's hard to know. I mean, I think that people will take, every piece is important. I mean, my years at Barnard were incredible. I wasn't a film major, but I was a fine arts and art history major, and I minored in English, and I read a lot of Shakespeare. And then I think going to USC, you learn a lot, you meet great people. I think what those things did facilitate was they helped me get my first film job. And I think that, when you're the hardest job, I think, to get is your first one, because you're just a name in a pile of hundreds of resumes. And unless you get lucky, it's very hard to land that first job. And I think that those experiences really helped me get my first job, which was as an assistant to two independent filmmakers who did both documentaries and narrative films. And that kind of helped me just kind of leapfrog to each job that I got subsequently. So I think the best, look, if you're fortunate, I'm incredibly fortunate for the education that I had, because it created a great foundation for me as an artist and as a storyteller. And then I think those experiences open doors that continue to open other doors. But I certainly wasn't someone who, like, out of grad school, like, I was actually freaking out. I was like, I need to get a job, and just was applying everywhere and asking everyone I knew. And eventually something worked out, and it really helped, just kind of this domino effect that has taken place over the last 12 years.
Yeah. How important was noodling your short film in terms of building your resume? I watched it, and it's a beautiful film. It's very, very,
thank you. I'm so glad you watched it.
Yeah, no, seriously. It's a really solid short, and there's I've seen a lot of short films over the years, and I've covered short fests, and it's tough. It's really tough, I think, to make a short film that's watchable. Frankly, it's a task, but I enjoyed it. But what was your goal in creating the short film? Was it a resume builder? Was it a passion project? Was it a combination of factors?
Believe it or not, I would say noodling was one of the best investments I ever made in myself. So that film was my graduate thesis film for USC,
Oh, okay.
and it was a short script I had written in one of my screenwriting seminars, and I just became completely obsessed with noodling because I'm from Great Neck in Long Island, and no one does noodling there. And I was like, this is the craziest thing I've ever seen.
Yeah.
And I say it was one of the best investments I ever made in myself because I self-financed it. And I also had some grant money that I'd gotten from being a student teaching assistant at USC for 2 years. And so, but actually we used it as part of the pitch packet as a pitch package for What Breaks the Ice. And actually one of our biggest investors came on board because he loved the short.
Really?
And yeah. And he was like, I watched this film and I loved it. And he was one of our bigger investors, and and that's how I met my business partner, Megan. So when I was a graduate student and she had just graduated from Clemson University and had moved to LA and was a fine arts major and was trying to make her way into a career as a production designer, which she is now, and a very, very talented one at that. And I posted this thing online that I was looking for an art director for another short film that I was production designing. And I met her at Cafe 101. And I always tell this story. She was like 22 years old and she came in like a white lace top. And I was like, this girl is going to be an art director. Okay, whatever. I was like, well, you know what? If she's not good, I'll find someone else. It's not a big deal. It was like a 5-day shoot. She showed up on set with like a power drill and just like no joke, I walk on the first day and she's already like taking stuff down and building things. And I was like, this girl's out of control.
Yeah.
And we've been friends ever since and worked on various projects together. I've even worked for her as a set deck. And then she's my partner on this movie. And we met doing noodling. She came to Oklahoma with me. She's like, my dad's a United Airlines captain. I fly for free. I'll come with you. Sure. Sounds like fun.
Wow.
And she was the art director on that. And yeah, we always say like, who knows where we'll go next? But so I feel and I love that film, I look back on it with like real love.
Yeah. The main actress, and I forget her name, but she had so much charisma. And just the close-ups on her face and her eyes, you could just see that she was just a star in the making, and you were able to capture a real sweetness and innocence with her, and that the way that story unfolded and the boy that she met and the relationship with her father. And it's such a short period of time that you just accomplished so much. So well done on noodling.
You.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. Madelyn Perry, she's awesome. And also another connection to this film is she and I are still really good friends. In fact, I was out in LA directing a music video and I stayed with her recently. She's acting. She's doing really well. And she actually was part of a proof of concept we did for this film. That was like the other visual component that we used to raise money. And that was also like other investors came on board because of that. So it all snowballs together. And it's just, I think the takeaway though, is that, things take a long time. I did that film 10 years ago. So yeah, things take a long time.
So I wanted to talk about music videos because I saw the Only Bricks video that you shot, and another beautifully shot piece. And a lot of fun too. But is that a side hustle for you, or is this something that you want to continue doing, shooting music videos? I don't really know where music videos fit into a feature film director's career plans.
Yeah, that was the first music video I've ever done, and I don't know either. actually. So that's why I wanted to do it
Mm.
because I figured, who knows where this will lead. And if not, it was another experience, another creative experience, another thing in my arsenal that I know how to do. I met a whole bunch of cool people that I worked with on that. And I love the band. I love their music. And so I felt like I can only learn from doing this. And that had its own challenges, shooting during COVID. It was certainly a challenge, but I think we did it very safely and I'm really proud of it. Yeah. So I don't know where it fits in either, but I do all kinds of things to, keep me moving and keep me creative.
Yeah. Well, I would imagine that your experience producing the Justin Timberlake concert film informed your approach to the music video.
Yeah, well, Jonathan, it was really interesting when we were in the early stages of that project happening, and I heard him in a meeting say, "We're going to make a concert film that's also a comedy." And I was like, I have no idea what you're talking about. Like, it didn't compute to me. But then when you watch the finished film, there's so much comedy in it, even though it's about the music and just the interactions between the band members and Justin with his band. And so I always kept that in the back of my mind of like, comedy and music go together in so many ways. In a pop song, I think, obviously not in a sappy, sad love song, but I think pop music lends itself to comedy. And so when I was pitching for this project, that was something that was forefront in my mind when we came up with the concept.
It's interesting that you bring up comedy and how Jonathan Demme mentioned that it was, comedy was part of the approach to the shoot, because when I think of comedy, I think of charisma, like Jack Black, for instance. I mean, if I think of charisma, the first actor I think about is the person who can raise one eyebrow and make everybody laugh. Right. And when I was watching the concert film, I watched it last night, the Justin Timberlake film, and I was just in awe of how much charisma this guy has and how he can just, the crew of people that had followed him and toured with him for 2 years, just magnetically attracted to him, not because they're starstruck, but because they love him. And then he gets up on stage and he can just move one leg or, shake his shoulders or kind of turn his head and completely, unleash, applause and insanity in the audience. And I was like, this would be so fun to be participating in this, even if you're not like a huge Justin Timberlake fan or a huge fan of that style of music. But just to capture that talent at the finale of his tour and just to see how it all goes down, it must have been fascinating to be part of that project.
Oh, that was like one of the highlights of my life, was being involved in that film. And, it was as Jonathan often said, he would say like the generosity of this band and Justin in the way that they are with the crowd. It's, you don't have to like the music to really enjoy the film. And I learned a lot about just generally, I mean, we shot that it was actually over 3 separate nights, and then kind of compressed into an 88-minute film as an homage to Stop Making Sense, which is also 88 minutes long. But one of the coolest experiences I had there, which was also a great learning experience, was I used to go with Jonathan and our editor and our producer to all the sound mixing and everything else. But we would talk about like creating drama, even with the way the music already sounded. Like, for example, like obviously the sound mixers that Justin worked with are like the best on earth. But Jonathan had like this unique approach to it where he's like, yes, but it's not just a concert, it's a movie. And so like bringing out certain instruments at certain times, depending on where the camera was, it was fascinating. I learned so much about like how you deal with sound as a director and how important it is, even for to accentuate certain things or to draw the viewer to certain characters on screen. And that's something that actually, because we have one sequence in particular in our film that has a lot of sound and a car crash and all kinds of other stuff, where I thought a lot about that experience, even though it was not a music concert film. It was a traditional narrative film.
Yeah. I listened to it with Bose noise canceling headphones, and I'm so glad I did, because it really felt like I was there. And I watched it on the big screen too, on my larger television, and it just felt so exciting to be there. But I was wondering, did Martin Scorsese's The Last Waltz inform either Jonathan's or your approach to this film? Because there's some obvious parallels with, the end of the tour, and I don't know if touring will ever come back like it was in 2016. Yeah. But, with The Last Waltz and I think it was called The Band, that in the 1970s they had their last concert that he directed a film of. But was that part of the equation at all, or was it just a completely fresh approach to how to film this concert film?
I can't take any credit for anything that was purely creative on that movie. That's all Jonathan, but I was a fly on the wall for a lot of it and got to give my insight when it was asked for. But I think that the whole tradition of concert films informed this one in particular. Yeah. We talked a lot about Stop Making Sense. That was really and obviously that was Jonathan's movie, but certainly, I think that what the response often was like that the way, like the evolution of the concert film, and like, what is it like, why do people go watch a movie about music, And so the ending is one of my favorite parts of that movie, because you see this whole thing get built, and then like you realize that there's so much more going on beyond the musicians themselves, and how it's like this whole traveling band of artisans and electricians, and like there's so many creative people that are involved in making this one thing happen, and then it's all dismantled and taken down, and it moves on.
What's next for you creatively?
So I have a couple projects I'm working on right now. I have a television pilot I wrote that I'm trying to get made. Very different from What Breaks the Ice. It's more of a marriage. It's a marriage story. It's also a dramedy. And then I'm writing, then you do the stuff that pays your bills, like writing TV movies and, selling, doing writer for hire jobs and meeting on various things like that. And then and I think I can talk about this actually. I've been quite fortunate. I became friends with one of the great grandchildren of the Von Trapp family. And he and I are working together to develop also a series about his family, but not really like about the sound of music, but really like about his grandmother, his mother, and him, and sort of like their lineage as being connected to one of the, his grandfather was one of the original Von Trapp family singers.
Wow.
And yeah, it's been such a fun project. So I've spent a lot of this summer meeting with his family members and going to visit their family lodge in Vermont. And it's, I think what I've learned from it, and I think what I'm excited about with this one in particular is, I think every family has a story of, let's put it this way. We all know the story of The Sound of Music, but and its message of hope. And I think as the generations have gone on, there are different stories of hope that manifest themselves in different ways, and are more, I think, are in tune with the struggles that we all face nowadays. In the United States, we're lucky enough to hopefully never have to flee our country because of, persecution, or there are people who have to. I don't want to say that this is that everyone in America has like the most idyllic life. That's not the case. But what we've started to delve into is like what are the issues that a family continues to deal with, and as the world changes around them.
Yeah. In terms of advice for folks that want to do what you do, you've put in a hell of a lot of work, and I don't think that there would be any real way to recreate the path that you took, which unfolded very organically over the course of a long period of time. But just generally, what advice do you have for younger people who are trying to break into the business in terms of film school versus no film school, LA versus Atlanta versus, mid-America, television versus film? I don't even know if there's a huge distinction between those two mediums anymore. But that type of advice for maybe a classroom full of 18-year-olds.
Well, I have a couple. One is, I feel very strongly about this. I say go to film school if you can, and I would say, let me rephrase that. Go to graduate film school if you can afford it. And if you can't, think twice, because even student loan debt is a huge problem in America. And that's not to say don't go to film school, because USC was one of the most life-changing experiences of my life. The second thing I would say is, however hard you think it's going to be, it's even harder. And you make sacrifices. And I'm not shy also about saying that there were a lot of things I gave up so that I could be doing this. And whether it's your personal life, whether it's vacations, whether it's a stable income, sometimes, it's a lot harder than you think it's going to be. And also that in your path, life is going to happen to you. Things happen along the way that you can't control. And, even for me, my brother died while we were finishing our movie, and I had to keep going. And that was really hard. And having to, sometimes people in the film industry are almost like allergic to real life. And so that's why they like swallow themselves in making film and TV, I think, because it's like this, it's all encompassing, and it's an escape, and it's exhilarating, and there's nothing like it. It's complete magic when it's working and when you're doing it, but life happens in the middle of it. And I think that was something that I had to learn the hard way. Not everything can be about making your movie. But yeah, I think also just incredible amounts of patience. And then one big piece of advice that I received that I think was a good one was, when you're starting out, to try to find a job that's going to expose you to as much as possible, and to really be working for people that are, even if you're just, and most of us start as assistants, where you're working with people that are making things. And so you get to see the process from start to finish, and you start to see where you feel like you could belong.
Gosh, that's incredible. Thank you for that very thoughtful explanation of your perspective on how to make it. Very sorry to hear about your brother.
Oh, thank you. But you know what? Like I said, life happens, and you learn something from it. And not that I wanted to learn that lesson, but thank you.
Yeah. Well, Rebecca, it's been a real pleasure to hear your story. Looking forward to seeing the response to this film. It is a lot of fun. It's a great thriller, and I hope listeners will go out and see it.
I really appreciate it. Thank you so much, and thanks for taking the time to talk to me.
Absolutely. Hey, thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If so, I have a favor to ask. Can you go to wherever you listen to podcasts and leave me a review? Your feedback is what keeps this podcast going. You can also check us out on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook with the handle @DreamPathPod. And as always, go find your dream path.